Starving alien woman ate from a dog's bowl on the street until a human gave her a hot meal.
Dravara 8's dockside quarter had a smell that didn't wash away. Wet rust, diesel exhaust, and the stale tang of standing water. The rain had been falling since dawn, thin at first, now steady enough to soak through the seams of anyone's coat. Neon signs blinked half-lit above doorways, their light broken by the curtain of water. Cargo haulers rumbled along the main route toward the customs yard, their massive tires hissing over puddles. Kalen Dross walked the narrow side street behind Bay 12, keeping his head down and his satchel close to his side. The satchel held 3 data slates and a half-dozen paper manifests wrapped in a weather cover. His job at the Port Authority was simple. Translate and cross-check freight documentation, make sure nothing coming through the docks mismatched its paperwork. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't dangerous, and that's exactly why he'd taken it. Kalen had learned to keep his profile low. He didn't argue in public. He didn't join in dockside gossip. He came here for the quiet routine. Walk to the office, work, walk back to his flat. That routine had kept him invisible for nearly 2 years. Today should have been like any other. But the sound that stopped him wasn't part of his routine. It was laughter, sharp, mocking, coming from an alley up ahead. He turned his head just enough to see where it came from, a knot of dockhands under a corrugated shelter, watching something in the rain. Then he saw her. She was crouched beside a dented metal trash bin, her bare feet flat on the wet pavement, knees drawn tight. Her skin, pale violet, almost gray in the dim light, was stretched thin over sharp cheekbones. Long strands of silver-white hair hung in clumps down her back, plastered to her neck and shoulders. She wore a halter top with frayed straps and a torn wrap skirt, both soaked through. The fabric clung to her hips and legs, leaving little to the imagination, and that seemed to be part of the spectacle for the onlookers. At her knees sat a dog bowl, chained to a post. Inside was rainwater and a few scraps of synthetic meat, probably from the nearby canteen's waste bin. She reached for one piece, put it in her mouth, chewed slowly. Someone in the crowd shouted something Kalen didn't catch, but the tone was enough. More laughter. She didn't look away from them. Her chin stayed level, eyes locked on nothing in particular. That defiance, even now, even like this, made something in Kalen's chest tighten. He could walk past. He'd done it before with others. It was safer, easier. He didn't. Kalen stepped forward, ignoring the shift in the crowd's attention. He pulled off his long wool-lined coat and draped it over her shoulders. She froze for a second, then gripped the edges and pulled it tighter. Her eyes lifted to meet his, deep lilac, with a faint gold shimmer that caught the light from the neon sign above. "Stand," he said quietly. She studied him first, as if deciding whether this was another trick. Then she put a hand against the bin and pushed herself up. Her legs trembled, and she swayed forward. Kalen caught her elbow, steadying her without pulling. The laughter died down as he led her away from the bin, across the wet street, and into the shelter of a small canteen tucked between 2 freight buildings. The air inside was warmer, heavy with the smell of broth and fried roots. The owner, a stocky woman in a patched apron, gave them a quick, assessing look but didn't speak. Kalen guided the alien woman to a table in the corner. "Bowl of spice broth," Kalen told the owner. "And bread." The woman nodded once and went to the counter. The alien woman sat stiff in the chair, clutching the coat around her like armor. Her hand shook, not violently, but enough that Kalen noticed. He filled a tin cup from the water spout and set it in front of her. "Drink," he said. She took it in both hands, sipped slowly. Some of the water ran down her chin. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. The broth came in a battered steel bowl. She picked up the spoon without hesitation and began eating, fast at first, then slower as she became aware of him watching. The coat slipped from one shoulder, revealing the line of her collarbone and a faint crescent-shaped marking at the base of her neck. She tugged the coat back into place. "What's your name?" Kalen asked. "Narine," she said after a pause. Her voice was low, slightly rough from disuse. "Yours, Kalen." "Kalen," she repeated, as if testing the sound. Then, "I'll work for this meal if you want. I don't want charity." "This isn't charity," he said. "You don't owe me anything." "There's always a price," she replied. "Not tonight." She glanced toward the door, the same quick, calculating look he'd seen in dockside laborers watching for trouble. "You speak poor dialect," Kalen said. "I learned so they couldn't pretend not to understand me," Nareen replied. "They understood. They just didn't care." Kalen leaned back. "What brought you to dockside?" "Foundry strike," she said simply. "Everything's shut down. No work. No place to live. No one here hires outsiders unless they can use you for less than they'd pay anyone else." The owner dropped off 2 mugs of tea without a word. Kalen slid one toward Nareen. "Where are you staying now?" he asked. "I'm not," she said. "That decided it. I've got a room 2 blocks away. Warm. Private. You can lock the door from the inside." Nareen's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" "Because you fed the dog before you finished eating," Kalen said. "And because I can." She stared at him for several seconds. Finally, she nodded once. They left together, stepping back into the rain. She walked with a slow, deliberate pace, keeping her head up even when the water streamed down her face. Kalen matched her stride without rushing. At his building, they climbed 4 flights of stairs. The hallway smelled faintly of damp plaster and oil from the maintenance lift. He unlocked his door and let her step inside first. The flat was small: bed, chair, shelves stacked with books, and rolled manifests, a narrow washroom. It was warm from the wall heater. "You can use the washroom," he said. "Clean towels in the rack." She stood there for a moment, scanning the room. Her eyes lingered on the deadbolt. "You'll sleep here?" "In the chair," he said. She nodded once, then stepped into the washroom and closed the door. Kalen heard the water run. When she came out, her hair was combed back, and she wore one of his clean shirts, the hem hanging mid-thigh. She pulled the coat tight again before sitting on the edge of the bed. "You almost walked past me," she said. "I almost did," he admitted. "But I didn't." "Why not?" Someone laughed. Kalen said. "I'm tired of that sound." She looked at him for a long time, then pulled the blanket over herself and lay down. Her hand slid under the pillow where he'd placed the spare key. Kalen settled into the chair by the window. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, for the first time that day, he felt the air in the room begin to settle. Morning came as a flat gray light through the blinds, and the room held the quiet thrum of the wall heater, while Kalen woke in the chair with his neck stiff and his lower back aching, and he kept still for a few seconds to listen. He heard water in the washroom, the soft scrape of the drawer by the bed, the careful steps of someone who didn't want to disturb anything she hadn't been invited to touch. And he thought through the day's duty list without standing up because part of him wanted to. Delay leaving. He had 3 cargo lots to clear at Port Desk 2, a stack of manifests that needed cross-checking against shipment seals, and a translation request from customs that would take most of the afternoon, none of it urgent in a way that would matter to anyone but his supervisor. And even that man measured time by whether the docks kept moving, not by which hour the paperwork landed on his tray. Nareen stepped out of the washroom with damp hair combed straight and tied at the nape with the same bit of copper wire. Her skin warmer now, the gray shirt hanging past her thighs, the blanket over her shoulders, and she scanned the room once as if confirming it was the same space she had fallen asleep in. Her eyes moved to the deadbolt, then to the chair, then to the table where the bent locker tag sat next to his satchel. And her expression eased a fraction when she saw he hadn't pocketed it. During the night, that small detail put a little order back into a life that had been running on disordered rules for too long. "Good morning," Kalen said, voice low so it didn't crowd her. She answered with a short nod first, then a quiet morning, and her eyes checked the window where the rain had thinned to a steady drizzle, and she took in the smell of the room, clean wool and tea from last night, and the sharper note of disinfectant from the washroom. And her shoulders dropped one notch from where she carried them when she expected to be told what to do next. "I'll make tea," he said, and he stood, working the stiffness out of his back with a small wince he tried not to show, and set the kettle on, and while the water heated he laid out 2 cups, a small tin of spice, a packet of broth, and a heel of bread he kept wrapped in cloth for mornings when he didn't feel like stopping at the stall on dockside. "I can cook," Nareen said, and she took a half step toward the counter and then stopped, waiting for his answer like someone who had been punished for touching the wrong pan. and he stepped aside without speech, and that told her more than a longer sentence would have. She moved with certainty once given the space. She rinsed the cups even though they were clean, because clean in someone else's kitchen still needed proof. She measured spice with 2 fingers and warmed the bread on the heater grill with a turn and a watchful eye so it didn't burn. Small practice motions from seam shop mornings when heat and timing were the only variables she could control. And when the kettle whistled, she took it off the boil at once and poured in a slow stream to avoid scalding the tea, and the room filled with something that wasn't comfort exactly, but it was the start of it. Kalen watched her work and tracked his own reactions with the same care he used on a difficult translation. He felt relief that she had taken the lead, because it meant she wasn't planning to run the second he turned his back. He felt a cautious pull in his chest that he recognized as attraction and shut it down to a manageable level, because anything faster than caution would be disrespect. And he felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on him in a new shape, not about rescuing anyone. He didn't like that word, more about not failing the decision he had made last night. They ate standing by the counter because the table felt too much like a negotiation site, and between sips of tea, she glanced at the coat folded on the chair and said, "I'll mend that if you want." And she pointed with her chin at the seam near the shoulder where the stitching had pulled, and he realized she had cataloged the room down to loose threads. "You sew," he said, not as a question. "Since I was small," she said, "shirts, wraps, dye shop aprons, book spines if the glue failed." And she pointed now at the shelf where 3 of his battered paperbacks sag at the binding, and she set her cup down. "I'll fix those today, and I'll clean the floor, and then I'll leave before you return so you don't have to tell me to go." "You don't have to leave," he said, and he felt the reflex flinch in her posture at the idea of staying. So he added, "You don't have to stay either. I'm not setting a condition." And he let the words sit without tone. She nodded once, still measuring him against outcomes she knew, then said, "If I stay the day, I'll find work by evening, anything with cash, or I'll trade mending for food. I won't eat your meals 2 nights in a row." And there was no defiance in it, only a rule she needed to keep. "You can set your own rules here," he said, and then he decided to address 2 questions he knew any listener would be asking after last night. First, the mark at her neck. Second, why he had stopped in the alley at all. And he chose a direct path. The crescent in your neck, you kept covering it. Does it put you in danger? She considered him for a long beat, then pushed her hair aside with 2 fingers and let him see it clearly. A thin crescent line, old ink precise. "It's my mother's line mark, or any Allen family's passive from mothers to daughters. It isn't a brand, but some men here treat any mark like ownership. I hid it because I'm tired of explaining the difference." And she dropped her hair back. "No one hunts me for it, they just talk. And sometimes talk costs safety." "Not in this room," he said, and he felt the words lock into place like a bolt seating. She shifted to the next question before he could. "Why did you really stop last night?" she said, not aggressive, just thorough. "You said to laugh, but people laugh here every hour." "I remembered a night at a different dock," he said, keeping it short because he didn't want to flood her with his past. "I watched a man fall, and I didn't move. I told myself it wasn't my business. Later, I wished I'd moved faster. I don't like repeating mistakes." And he held her gaze so she could read the truth in it. She accepted it with a small incline of her head, and a quiet followed that wasn't empty. It was space being remeasured now that a few facts had been said. Kalen dried his cup, set it upside down on the rack, and checked his slate. The time pushed at him, but he didn't want to rush her into the street with wet hair and a coat that still carried the smell of last night. So he opened the chest at the foot of the bed and pulled a second shirt and a pair of drawstring pants, both clean but faded, and he set them on the blanket without ceremony. "These are spare. Keep them or trade them." And he pulled out a small roll of credit chits and paused, because handing someone money on a second morning could turn the room into the kind of place she had survived before. So he didn't offer the chits. He opened a drawer and placed them inside and left the drawer open so she could see where they were if she needed them on her own terms. "I'll be at the port until late afternoon," he said. "I don't bring people here. You won't be interrupted. The neighbors don't look in." And then he added a new line because the balance mattered to her. "If you stay today, mend what you want, leave a note if you go, take the key either way." And he slid the key from under the pillow to the table where she could reach it without crossing the bed. She looked at the key and left it where it was for now. "If I stay today, it's because it's raining and because the coat needs a seam, not because I owe you anything more than the mending. And he answered with a simple understood, because underlining it would have sounded like persuasion. He put on his other coat, the thin one, and shouldered the satchel. And at the door he said one more thing that would make sense to anyone who wanted to know the arc of his part in this story. My work is translation, but my personal mission right now is to keep this room a place where you decide what happens to you. And he didn't wait for thanks because thanks would force her into a corner. He just stepped into the hall. He made it down 2 flights before his chest tightened with the thought that he had left too quickly, that she might need one more instruction or one more point of reference. So he turned back and climbed, and at his door he paused because he didn't want to startle her. He knocked once and then opened. She had the coat spread on the table already, needle threaded with a length of thin cord scavenged from the drawer, and she had unpicked the seam and was running small, tight stitches with a speed that said she had done this in bad light with cold fingers many times. And his first impulse was to compliment the work, but praise often felt like a demand for more. So he took the other approach. He set a small box of binding glue and 2 lengths of linen tape on the table beside the paperbacks. Book spines, he said, when you're done with the seam, only if you want. And she glanced from the materials to his face and read no test there, only a list, and she nodded. I'll be back by 4, he said. Don't be later than 5, she said. And for a second he thought she was setting a curfew. Then she added, office workers begin drinking at 6. I don't like the stairwell at shift change. And he realized she was planning safety logistics for both of them. That was new. That made the room feel more like a shared plan than a shelter. He left again, and this time he went all the way down and into the street. And the air hit his face with clean cold. And he moved toward the port with his hands in his pockets and his mind running a steady assessment of potential problems, even as he told himself there would be none. Still, he prepared answers for the questions people might ask him if this were a story told aloud. What if she stole from him? What if she left and the room felt empty in a way that made him angry? What if she stayed? And the room changed into something he didn't recognize. And he answered each question in order. If she stole, he would live. If she left, he would accept it. If she stayed, he would keep the rules clear and simple so neither of them had to guess. At the port, the day moved in routine steps. He scanned tags, matched lots to their numbers, flagged one crate with a mislabeled chemical code, and wrote a note to the foreman in plain language he couldn't ignore. And between tasks, he thought about the crescent mark at Noreen's neck and the way her hand had eased when she saw the locker tag still on a shelf. And he understood that her main mission, if anyone needed that spelled out, was survival with dignity, not survival at any cost, and that distinction would decide how she moved through his space and through the quarter. Back at the flat, the afternoon light had shifted from gray to a dim yellow, and the rain had finally slowed. He unlocked the door and stepped in with a small held breath he didn't let her see. And the first thing he noticed was the floor. It was clean in a way that came from patient work on hands and knees. The books had been mended and stacked in a straight line. The coat seam looked new. The bed was made with the blanket squared. And on the table sat 2 cups and a covered pan, giving off low steam. I found root and a little spice in your cupboard, Nareen said from the stove without turning. And a packet of broth. I didn't take more. And when she did turn, he saw she had found the drawstring pants and rolled them at the waist to fit. The shirt sleeves were folded back to the elbow. Her hair was dry, and her posture had a steadiness that hadn't been there last night. Smells good, he said. And he meant it because it did. And he moved to the sink to wash his hands because bringing the street's grime to the table felt wrong now. They ate without rush. And between bites, she set small facts on the table the way you set tools in order, not to confess, not to bond, to establish the ledger so there were no surprises. My mother's people hire by season and cast you off when orders fall. They don't keep records anyone respects here, she said. The strike started with a pay delay and ended with locks changed. The dye shop burned after. No one proved who said it. I left because the crowd didn't care whether I burned with it. And she stopped there, not looking for sympathy, just stating the weather of the last months. Kalen offered his own history at the same level. I came to Dravara because this job is quiet and because I wanted a place where no one knows my family name. He said, there's nothing wrong with them. I just wanted to build a life that belonged to my choices. And he glanced at the chair that had held him last night. That includes who I opened my door to. Then we understand each other, she said. They cleaned the dishes together without comment, and he reached for the towel, and she took it from him and dried while he washed. And when their fingers touched over the same cup, neither of them pulled back. They just set the cup down and continued. And the ordinary act did more to set the tone of the room than any spoken rule. After, he pulled a small storage box from under the bed and opened it so she could see its contents. A handful of old letters, a spare slate, a sealed packet of emergency rations, a second set of keys tied with string. If you ever need to leave fast and I'm not here, he said, take the string and the rations and go. Don't wait for me. And he felt the odd surge of relief that came from saying it out loud, because it turned a fear into a plan. I won't leave without a note, she said, and she tapped the table where a stub of pencil now sat in a dish. Placed there by her, a quiet addition, a tool in reach. As evening thickened, the building changed its sound. Footsteps in the hall, a cough, a door closing 2 floors down, the hum of the heater cycling, and Narration looked at the window, and then at the clock, and then at him, and he read the question and answered it before she asked. You can keep the bed tonight, too, he said. I'll take the chair again. And when she started to object, he cut it short with a simple, I sleep fine in a chair, because arguing gratitude into her would undo the day's work. Then one change, she said, and she lifted the spare pillow and carried it to the chair and set it there herself. A shared gesture that recast the arrangement into something chosen by both. And she moved to the bed and slid the key under the pillow again, and he registered the repetition without worry, because repetition also builds safety when it belongs to the person choosing it. Before the light went off, she sat on the edge of the bed and said one last thing that answered the next question any careful listener would hold. I'm not here to be kept. I'm here until I can stand on my own feet without the rain pushing me to my knees, she said. I'll find work that isn't selling myself. I'll pay back what I use with the skills I have. And he nodded once. I'll translate cargo until my hands forget the cold, and I'll keep this room steady so it doesn't turn into something. It shouldn't, he said, and with both statements on the air, the edges of the arrangement felt clear. He turned off the light and the room settled. And as he lay back in the chair, he let his thoughts run in a straight line instead of a loop. He examined his fear of doing too much and turning care into control. He examined his fear of doing too little and letting her fall through a gap he could have bridged. He set simple rules for himself because simple rules hold under stress. Offer food, offer shelter, don't demand, ask before touching. Speak when silence would confuse, hold silence when words would intrude. And he felt his chest ease because a plan, even a modest one, gave the night a clear shape. On the bed, Narration lay facing the door with one hand on the key, and her mind walked the same line in the opposite direction. She checked the day for traps and found none. She checked the man for gaps in his story and found a few she could watch without panic. And she noted with precise relief that the laughter from last night did not follow her into her sleep, and that, more than the heater or the meal, told her she had made a sound choice for one day more. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving the streets below damp and smelling faintly of oil and cold metal. Kalen woke before dawn, the stiffness in his shoulders reminding him of the chair, but this time the discomfort didn't carry the same tension. He listened first, steady breathing from the bed, no creak from the hallway, the building's pipes clicking softly as they cooled. He sat forward slowly so the sound wouldn't wake her, then noticed her eyes were already open, watching the door like someone who measured every morning for danger before deciding whether to move. You're awake, he said. I heard the stairwell, she replied, sitting up with the blanket pulled around her shoulders. Someone came up to the 3rd floor, then went back down. Boots heavy. Didn't stop here. Kayla nodded. Night shift workers. They cut through to the alley after clock out. He hesitated, then added, You've got good ears. Habit, she said. You don't last long if you sleep too deep. It was one of the things Kalen had noticed, but not asked in the first 2 days, how she seemed to hear before she looked, how she kept her back to walls, how she watched hands more than faces. Now, it was confirmed. Her caution wasn't just distrust, it was a skill she had to keep alive. He stood and put the kettle on the heater plate. Tea or broth? Tea. Broth later, she said, and her voice was steady enough now that he caught the difference from their first conversations. The hunger edge was gone, replaced by something more measured. As the kettle worked, Kaylin took out 2 clean shirts from a chest. I'll be at the port until mid-afternoon. Dockside's crowded today. A freighter came in overnight. If you need anything, the canteen owner knows me. Narine's eyes narrowed slightly. And what would I tell her if she asks who I am? That was another gap he hadn't filled yet. Tell her you're staying here for a time. No other details. People in Dockside don't need more than that. She tilted her head, watching him carefully. And what will you say if someone asks about me? That you're here because I wanted you here. That's enough. She didn't answer right away, but the small unclenching in her shoulders told him the reply had passed her test. While they drank tea, she asked, "What's in your translation work that makes you so careful?" It was a question he had been expecting. Some manifests have altered codes, he said. Wrong numbers can move dangerous cargo past inspection. I don't let that slide. Her brow furrowed. Doesn't that put you in someone's way? Sometimes, he admitted, but I'm paid to match the cargo to the paper. If I ignore it, I'm as much to blame as the man who changed the code. He paused. That's my rule. If something's wrong and I can fix it, I do. If I can't, I get it to someone who can. She studied him, not with admiration, but with calculation, as if weighing whether this rule was another layer of self-interest or something solid. And that's why you stopped in the alley? Yes. It was something I could fix, he said simply. He didn't add the other reason, the one she might not be ready to hear. That seeing her feed the dog first had been the moment he knew she wasn't broken yet, just pushed close to it. Narine glanced at the locker tag, still on the shelf. You left that where I can see it. Why? So you know I'm keeping my word, Kaylin said. If you walk out tomorrow, you could take it back. No one else will touch it. This was another unanswered piece from the first night. She had needed to know if he saw the tag as leverage. Now she knew he didn't. By the time he left for work, the floor was already swept again, and she had a stack of mended cloth folded neatly at the edge of the table. He noticed she'd cut a strip from the frayed blanket hem to make better thread, the kind of choice you made when waste wasn't an option. At the port, Kaylin's day was heavier than usual. The incoming freighter's logs were a mess. Multiple language shifts in the same manifest, some obviously deliberate to obscure the cargo. He flagged 2 shipments for secondary inspection. The foreman gave him a look that promised trouble later, but Kaylin didn't care. He was more concerned with getting back before shift change, just as she had warned. When he returned, the door was locked from the inside. That was good. He knocked twice, the way they'd agreed in the morning. She opened it a crack, then the rest of the way. Inside, the smell of cooked grain and spice lingered. The books were in tighter order than before, and a clean set of his work clothes was hanging by the heater. She had been busy. I took the liberty of washing these, she said. The water from the tap is slow, but it's hot. Kaylin hung his coat. Thank you. Over the meal, she filled in another blank from their earlier conversations without prompting. My father was Alan. My mother was Irene. That's why the mark on my neck looks different from the others in my line. It's not a common match, and people here don't see it as a good one. Is that why you left your family? Kaylin asked. They didn't send me away, she said. I left because there's no place for a woman without a trade after the factories shut down. And I wasn't going to wait for someone to decide my price. The bluntness in her tone left no room for pity. It also told him something important. She hadn't been abandoned in the way the dockside crowd would assume. She had chosen to walk, even if it meant ending up in an alley. That night, they didn't talk much after eating. Kaylin worked at the small desk by the window, clearing a few translation notes for the morning. Narine sat on the bed, mending one of the books he'd left out. The room felt different, less like a space holding 2 strangers, more like a space where both had a reason to be. Before the lights went off, she set the mended book on the shelf and said, "You should know, if I decide to stay longer than a week, it won't be because I can't leave. It'll be because I choose to." That's the only reason I'd want, Kaylin said. It was the clearest understanding they'd reached yet, and it settled in the air between them like an agreed contract. No signatures, no paper, just 2 people marking the terms in the way they looked at each other before the room went quiet. By the 4th morning, the rhythm between them was starting to feel deliberate instead of improvised. Kaylin rose first, made tea, and set the kettle aside so the steam didn't fog the window. Narine stayed in bed until the stairwell quieted, then moved with the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the pace unhurried but never careless. He had planned to spend the day at the port office, routine desk work, translating manifests into a single standard language before they were sent to customs. Nothing unusual, but halfway through his first cup of tea, his slate vibrated with a message from a coworker. A container seal check had been delayed, and Kalen's signature was needed in person at Bay 9. It wasn't far from the flat, maybe 20 minutes on foot, but Bay 9 was always crowded in the mornings. Dockhands, loaders, and too many eyes looking for distraction. He didn't like the idea of leaving her alone for hours. The heater was steady, there was food, but the building was quieter during the day, and quiet in dockside didn't always mean safe. She read his hesitation. "You need to go," she said. "I do," he admitted. "I could lock the door from outside." "No," she cut in. "I keep the key. If I need to leave, I leave." That was fair. But then she added, "I'll come with you." It caught him off guard. She hadn't set foot outside since the night in the alley. "Bay 9 is busy," he said. "It's not calm." Her expression didn't change. "If I'm going to look for work, I need to see the streets again. Better to do it with you there." He waited. There were risks. The people who had seen her at the dog bowl might recognize her. Anyone noticing her in his company might decide to invent a story about them. But she was right. Keeping her inside wasn't a solution. "Fine," he said, "but you stay close." We moved through the crowd quickly. She dressed in the clean drawstring pants and shirt she'd worn the day before, the coat over them. Her hair, she tied back in a plain knot. The crescent at her neck was hidden beneath the collar. The streets were slick from last night's rain. Steam drifted up from gutter vents, mixing with the smell of frying oil from early food stalls. Narration walked half a step behind him, scanning everything. Hands reaching into pockets, shadows and doorways, carts loaded with loose cargo. She didn't flinch from the noise, but her eyes kept moving. When they reached Bay 9, Kalen led her along the edge of the loading zone. The container in question was a battered steel unit, its seal code mismatched by one digit from the manifest. He signed the inspection order, logged the correction, and handed it off to the customs clerk. It should have been a 2-minute task, but the foreman, a heavy-set man with a scar along his jaw, stepped up beside them. "You're early," the foreman said, glancing between Kalen and Narration. "Didn't expect you to bring company." "She's not company," Kalen said evenly. "She's with me." The foreman's eyes lingered on Narration in a way Kalen didn't like. "I've seen her before." Kalen kept his tone neutral. "Probably. Dockside isn't big." The man didn't push it, but the implication was there. Narration didn't react outwardly, though he noticed her right hand curl into a fist inside the coat pocket. They finished the paperwork and left without delay. Once they were clear of the bay, Kalen slowed his pace. "You handle that well." "I've dealt with worse," she said. "He'll tell someone he saw me with you." "I know," Kalen replied. "We'll control the story before they can invent it." "Ow! I'll tell anyone who asks that you're staying in my spare room for now. Nothing more. If they push, I'll shut it down." They stopped at a small vendor stall on the way back, one Kalen trusted. He bought a paper-wrapped portion of fried root slices and handed half to her. She ate them slowly, eyes still scanning the street. "First time I've eaten outside without looking over my shoulder in a long time," she said quietly. "That's the goal," Kalen said. Back at the flat, she removed her coat, sat at the table, and finally let the tension show in her hands. He made tea without asking, set it in front of her, and didn't speak until she'd finished half the cup. "Now you've seen it," he said. The noise, the eyes, the questions. "Do you still want to go out alone for work?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "But I'll choose where carefully. No docks. No markets where they trade labor for bed space. Somewhere I can work with my hands and keep my back to a wall." He nodded. "We can start looking tomorrow." It was the first time they'd said we about anything beyond the flat's walls, and it stayed in his mind for the rest of the day. That night, she moved the key from under her pillow to the small dish by the bed. It was a small thing, but Kalen noticed the shift from hiding it to setting it in the open meant something had changed. The morning air carried the damp chill left behind by 3 days of rain. Kalen had decided they would leave early, before the docks reached full noise, to look for a place that might take Narration on without questions that would corner her. He kept the pace steady as they crossed the narrow streets away from the port and into the older part dockside, a section where the buildings leaned inward and the signage was hand-painted instead of neon. The smell here was different, with smoke, drying fabric, and faint traces of the dye shops that had long since shut down. Narration walked beside him, not behind. Her coat was buttoned high, her hair tied back, the crescent mark at her neck hidden. She had asked no questions on the way out, but he could tell she was cataloging every storefront, every alley, every face. Kaylin's plan was simple. Stay away from markets where hiring meant sleeping in the storerooms. Avoid any place with a foreman who looked at women like they were part of the equipment, and focus on trades that valued skill over strength. He knew a few small shops that fit. The first was a bookbinding stall run by an older man named Russell. The stall sat behind a narrow glass front, the smell of glue and paper inside. Russell glanced up from a spine he was repairing. "Kaylin, you never come here before midday." "Looking for someone?" Kaylin said. He stepped aside so Russell could see Narration. "She's good with mending cloth bindings. Works clean." Russell's gaze went from Kaylin to Narration. "You speak?" "Yes," Narration said. Her tone was even, but Kaylin caught the way her shoulders tightened to being addressed like she might not. Russell tapped the spine in front of him. "Show me." He slid the book across. Narration didn't move immediately. Instead, she pulled a small length of linen thread from her coat pocket, taken from the blanket she'd trimmed days earlier, and set it on the counter. She examined the tear in the spine, tested the glue with a fingertip, then worked in silence. Her hands were quick, but not rushed. In a few minutes, the spine was reinforced, the linen hidden beneath a smooth layer of adhesive. She slid the book back. Russell checked her work, ran his thumb along the seam. "Clean," he said finally, "but I've no full-time spot. I can give you day work when I got backlog. 3 credits a book." "I'll take it," she said. They left the stall with no more than a brief nod from Russell. Outside, Kaylin asked, "3 credits isn't much." "It's enough for a meal and a roof if I had to be on my own," Narration said. "That's what matters." The second stop was a seam shop 2 streets over. The owner, a woman named Halma, worked with her head down until she saw Kaylin, then glanced at Narration. "If you're vouching for her, I'll pay per piece. Bring your own tools." Narration agreed without hesitation, but Kaylin could tell she was noting the exits and the other workers. She didn't like crowded rooms. By midday, they had secured 2 places where she could pick up work without binding herself to an employer's lodging. On the walk back, they cut through a quieter street. That was where it happened. 2 men were standing at a corner, talking in low voices. As Kaylin and Narration passed, one of them, a lean dockhand Kaylin recognized from Bay 9, looked up and narrowed his eyes. "That's her," he said to his companion. "The one from the alley." Kaylin stopped just enough to put himself between them and Narration. "She's working now. Leave it." The man smirked. "Working for you, is she?" Kaylin didn't raise his voice. "She's with me. That's all you need to know." There was a pause. The man's companion muttered something Kaylin didn't catch, and they moved on. But Narane's jaw was tight all the way back to the flat. Inside, she removed her coat and went straight to the table. "That's why I don't like being out here without a plan," she said. "We'll make one," Kaylin replied. "From now on, if you're out and someone asks, you tell them the truth. You've got work, you've got a place to sleep, and it's not theirs to question. And if they push," she asked. "Then you walk away," Kaylin said. "And if you can't, you find me." That night, she laid the key on the table instead of the dish by the bed. A deliberate choice. She didn't say why, but Kaylin understood. It was her way of saying she was here because she wanted to be, not because she was locked in. For the first time, they ate without the weight of caution pressing every word. She told him about the dye shop, the smell of boiling vats, the way the colors stained her hands for days, the long hours on her feet. He told her about his first year at the port, when he'd nearly been fired for refusing to clear a shipment with falsified hazard codes. By the time the lights went off, the flat no longer felt like a space shared by chance. It felt like the start of something they were building together, carefully, without saying it out loud yet, but both aware of it. The next morning started with a dry wind coming off the docks, carrying grit that settled on every exposed surface. Narration was already up when Kaylin woke, standing by the window with her coat buttoned and her hair tied back. The key sat in her palm. "I'm going to Halma's seam shop," she said before he could ask. "First day. I want to be early." Kaylin moved to the counter and put the kettle on. "You'll take the long way. Fewer dockhands." She nodded once, already expecting the instruction. "I'll be back before shift change." He handed her a cloth-wrapped packet, bread, and a small piece of smoked root. "In case Halma doesn't give you a break." "Do you pack lunch for everyone?" she asked. Not mocking, just curious. "Only for people I don't want getting lightheaded with a needle in their hand," he said. She took it and slipped it into her coat. The exchange was simple, but it landed between them as another quiet agreement. He would plan for her safety. She would accept it without turning it into a debt. The seam shop sat in a narrow building with 2 rows of long tables and the steady sound of thread pulling through cloth. Narration kept her coat on until she was at her station, then folded it neatly over the chair. Halma gave her a pile of damaged work aprons, torn straps, frayed hems. She worked without pause, her stitches straight and quick. The other women glanced at her from time to time, some with curiosity, some with the flat disinterest of people used to seeing new faces come and go. No one spoke to her until midday when a woman across the table leaned in. "You're the one from Dockside, aren't you?" "The dog bowl." Narine's hands kept moving. "I'm the one who's working," she said. The woman smirked. "Working for the poor clerk, I hear." Narine set down the apron, looked directly at her. "Working for myself. That's all." Halma's voice cut across the table. "If you can talk, and so fine. If not, save it for the street." The woman looked away, and the room went back to its rhythm. When Narine left at the end of the shift, she took the long route back as agreed. But at the corner 2 streets from the flat, the same lean dockhand from Bay 9 stepped out from a doorway. "Got a new trade now," he said, his eyes flicking to the parcel in her hand. The day's pay, folded in paper. She kept walking. "Not going to thank me for keeping my mouth shut?" he called after her. She didn't stop, didn't look back, just turned into the next street where more people were walking. Kaylin was already at the flat when she arrived. She locked the door behind her, set the parcel on the table, and exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath since the corner. "Someone followed you," he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded. "The dockhand. He wanted me to know he could cause trouble." "Did he touch you?" "No, just words." Kaylin thought about going Bay 9 to have a conversation, but he knew that would cross the line they'd agreed on. She didn't want to be kept like a problem to solve. Instead, he said, "Next time, if you see him, you turn the other way, even if it means being late." "I can handle him," she said, but there was no defiance in it, only tired certainty. "I know you can," Kaylin replied, "but I'm not giving him the satisfaction of thinking he's part of your day." She seemed to consider that, then pulled out the bread he'd packed that morning. "You were right. No break." "Then we'll eat now," he said. They ate at the table, the small parcel of pay between them. Neither touched it. When the plates were cleared, she slid it across to him. "For rent," she said. He pushed it back. "Not rent. Put aside. You'll need it when you choose your own place." Her eyes searched his face for any sign of pretense. Finding none, she folded the parcel and tucked it into the pocket where the locker tag usually sat. It was the first time he'd seen her set something of value in the same place. She kept the tag, a signal that, in her mind, the pay she'd earned and the promise she'd made on that first night carried the same weight. That night, when she slid the key under the pillow again, it felt less like protection from him and more like protection of what they'd built in the days since the alley. The wind off the bay carried the faint metallic tang of incoming freight. Kaylin woke to the sound of Narine moving around the room. Not quietly, not trying to avoid waking him, just moving with the steady rhythm of someone who had things to do. She'd already tied her hair back and was folding the mended work aprons from Halma's shop into a neat stack on the table. "You're early," he said, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Halma has more work for me. Wants me to take some home," she replied. "Said my stitches are cleaner than her last 3 hires." He gave a small nod. "That's good. It's work. And it pays," she said, setting the stack aside. "Enough to start a ledger." That word made him pause. A ledger. She straightened. "If I'm going to leave here one day, I want to know exactly what I have, what I've spent, and what I owe. The way she said it, matter of fact, without edge, told him she wasn't warning him, just stating a fact. Still, it landed in his chest heavier than he expected. You're already thinking about leaving? I've been thinking about it since the first night, she said, meeting his eyes. Not because I want to run, because I need to know I could. Kaylin leaned against the counter. And if you could tomorrow, I'd still stay for now, she said. Because this is the first place in months where I sleep with the door locked and don't wake up expecting someone inside. She let that hang there for a second. But I can't build a life if I don't have my own ground to stand on. He didn't argue. Instead, he poured tea into 2 cups and set one in front of her. Then we make sure you get there without anyone thinking they own the road you walked. She gave the faintest smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. That's harder than you think in this quarter. I know exactly how hard it is, he said. They left together. She to deliver the finished aprons, he to the port office, but their paths crossed again by chance 2 hours later in the covered market. He spotted her first, standing at a stall with bolts of cloth, running her fingers along the weave. She was talking with the stall keeper, an older woman with sharp eyes. The conversation looked calm, businesslike. When the stall keeper glanced over and saw Kaylin, her expression shifted, curious but not hostile. Narine caught the glance and turned, meeting his eyes. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the few meters of crowd between them. And he realized anyone watching would see it. They were connected in a way that wasn't just about a shared roof. On the walk back to the flat later that afternoon, Narine carried a small wrapped parcel. Paid for it myself, she said. Needles. Good ones. And a small shears. An investment, Kaylin said. A start, she replied. Back inside, she set the parcel on the table and reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out the small parcel of credits from the seam shop and placed it next to the locker tag. They go together, she said. He understood what she meant. The tag was the debt she'd promised to clear. The credits were the proof she was working toward it on her terms. That evening, as they ate, she broke the comfortable silence. When I can pay the debt I think I owe you, meals, heat, space, I want to know what happens next. Kaylin set down his cup. What do you want to happen? She looked at him for a long time before answering. If I stay after that, it won't be because I can't leave. It'll be because this feels like my place too. He held her gaze. Then if that's the choice you make, it's the one I'll take. No conditions. For the first time since that night in the alley, she let her shoulders drop fully, as if that weight had been there the whole time. Before they turned in, she moved the key again, this time not under the pillow, not in the dish, but on the small shelf beside his plant in plain sight. She didn't explain, and he didn't ask, but he knew what it meant. The key wasn't about escape anymore. It was about ownership, shared, not taken. When the lights went off, the room felt different. Not because of anything said, but because they'd finally named what the next step would be, and both knew they were walking toward it together. The next week passed without rain, the streets drying into a dull gray that showed every crack and oil stain. Kaylin's days at the port were steady. Routine inspections, translation work that kept his head down and his name off anyone's trouble list. Narine's days were no longer spent inside. She split her time between Halma's seam shop and Wressel's book stall, carrying her work back and forth in a cloth bag she'd made from scrap fabric. By the 7th day, she had 3 neatly folded parcels of credits stacked on the shelf beside the locker tag. That morning, she laid them out on the table before Kaylin had even poured tea. That's what I've put aside, she said. It covers more than I've used here. Kaylin didn't look at the credits right away. And you think this settles the debt? I don't think, she said. I know it does. He studied her. Her voice didn't carry the sharpness of someone trying to push away. It was even, steady. She had reached the point she'd talked about from the start. Then there's only one question left, he said. Now that you can leave without owing me anything, do you want to? Her eyes didn't shift. No. It was the first time she'd given an answer that clear without adding conditions. Why, he asked. Because I'm not here because I have to be anymore, she said. I'm here because it's the first place in years that feels like I can belong without someone holding that over me. She paused. And because I want to belong here, with you. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the heater. He felt the air in his chest loosen. Then the credits go back into your ledger. For whatever we decide to build next. Her mouth tightened just enough to show that the word we had landed. We, he said. They ate breakfast without rushing. The credits stayed on the table, not tucked away, as if both of them needed to see them there to mark the shift. When they left the flat together later that morning, it wasn't for her work or his. It was to walk through the market side by side. People noticed. The same dockhand from Bay 9 caught sight of them near a spice stall. His smirk faded when Kalen met his eyes without looking away. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. She wasn't alone, and she wasn't a target. They stopped at a hardware stall, where Kalen bought a new lock for the flat door. Heavier, better built than the old one. Back home, he fitted it in place while Nareen boiled tea. When the work was done, he handed her the first of 2 keys. "This one's yours," he said. "Not a loan, not a spare. Yours." She turned it in her hand, the edges catching the light, then slid it onto a cord and tied it around her neck, resting against the crescent mark. "Then this is my home," she said. That night, they sat by the window as the lights from the docks flickered in the distance. The credits were in her ledger, the locker tag still on the shelf. She didn't move it. It wasn't a debt anymore, but a piece of her history she wanted in sight. When the lights went off, she didn't put the key on the shelf, or under the pillow, or in the dish. She kept it around her neck, lying on her side, facing him in the chair. "You almost walked past me that night," she said quietly. "I almost did," he admitted again, "but I'm glad I didn't." She reached out, fingers brushing his hand, not by accident this time. "So am I." In the quiet that followed, there was no unspoken condition, no shadow of an end. They had both made the choice, and it was the same one. From that day forward, no one in Dockside referred to her as the woman from the alley. She was Nareen, the seam worker, the book mender, the woman in the flat on the 4th floor. And Kalen was the man she'd chosen to stay with. Not because he saved her, but because together they had made a place worth staying in.